Okay, so what we're going to do is we have a POWTS Chat here. We should have some time for some questions at the end. You can just pop those into your chat screen if you so wish. I believe most of you have run this through before. Make sure that you enter in your credentials as we get going to get started, and then we'll sign back out with our credentials afterwards. But wanted to go through a few things that has cropped up through the summer. It's been very busy. We'll talk about a few of those things as we go along here. So, well, there it goes. I don't know why it wasn't moving there. So anyway, POWTS Chat. My computer is very slow today. There we go. So the first thing I wanted to do is update here some of the POWTS personnel that we have. As Katie mentioned, and as for those of you that tuned in last month, CC has retired from state service and is, I now believe, hanging out a shingle, doing some private work. She's still going to be, providing some training and input, through her role now privately as a semi-retired person. We'll want to update you on the staff. Myself, Katie, Tim, I had time. I misspelled. Sorry, Tim. Autocorrect must have got me. Travis, and then the vacant position for CC. We also have the office staff, which would be Josh right now. We also have 2 vacant positions in there. And then our supervisor, April Hammond, is on board with us. So what that basically looks like here is, this is our inspection map. Different districts that we have. Katie covers District 4, I'm in District 3, Travis is in District 2, and Tim is in District 5. So for right now, we're going through the hiring process. That position was posted. Well, actually, all 3 positions are posted, our 2 new plan reviewers and CC's position. I believe that ended last night at midnight, the open positions. But we do have to do some coverage in the meantime. So this is just temporary. We're not posting this on the website or anything, but just for those of you that are interested, we've also shared with the counties affected, is that temporarily, and this is mostly applies to things such as, a state inspection, or if there's an on-site needed for like an interpretive determination or something like that, that Katie is taking on a few of the counties in CC's old district. So she's dealing with St. Croix, Pierce, Dunn, Chippewa, Rusk, and Price. I'm taking Taylor, Clark, Eau Claire, Pepin, Buffalo, Trempealeau, and Jackson, and Travis is helping out with La Crosse and Monroe. So we're sort of splitting up the district just in the meantime, just to have coverage now. Again, if you have a question and you can't get a hold of somebody, you're always welcome to call another field person and ask them those kind of questions if something's urgent. But we're going to try to take on that area for now because we're anticipating going through some interviews in the next week or 2, and then putting a job offer out there and hopefully getting somebody hired yet in the next couple months. So this is just a short-term solution. Once we get to that position where we're looking at hiring somebody, we don't know if they're going to be in that district or not, if the district boundaries are going to stay the same or if they'll change. That'll be something we'll have to discuss at a later time. But for right now, we're not changing the district boundary, so to speak. We're just sort of covering those areas. So just wanted you to be up to date on any potential issues you might have, so you sort of know who to contact. But again, contact the counties, or if you are the county, you should have been reached out by CC before she left, or us. Should sort of know who to direct your calls to. Wanted to mention Wisconsin Fund. I had a lot of questions here as the year's been going on with Wisconsin Fund. Previously in the year, the question is Wisconsin Fund, is it going to live or not? So in the state budget, there has been legislation that extends the Wisconsin Fund sunset date. Well, it was June 30th of 2023. Now it's extended to June 30th of 2025. So So that sunset date has been moved back now, and it's an extra $840,000 per year to fund Wisconsin Fund. However, the incomes have not changed. That was a proposal to change the income limit and the age of the system, and those were not changed. Those are still what they were in the past. I know some people have said, well, we should open it up more. Those are really restrictive, the income limit and the age of the systems. 78, that's a fairly old system. That's 45 years old. Well, the last few years that we've run Wisconsin Fund, we've still been giving out plenty of, we've given out all the money that's allotted to us. So it's not like we're running short of applicants and we have too much money and we can't give it away. We still are, even with those limitations placed on us. So the sunset date has been moved back. However, the implementation of that Wisconsin Fund is still under review by the department. And the reason for that is like a lot of budgetary things, even though they've extended the sunset date, there's some questions about exactly where that funding is coming from to pay for Wisconsin Fund. So even though Wisconsin Fund has been extended, we're still trying to figure out the particulars of how to implement that, and we don't have an answer yet. So I know a lot of counties have been asking. I know some private individuals have been asking, how do we apply? What do we need to do? What's exactly going to happen? And unfortunately, we don't have those answers for you yet. So most of the counties I've talked to are taking tentative applications, knowing that things may change, but they're going through that process. The counties don't have to send in their applications to us until January 30th. So there's still some time yet, to get things straightened out. But again, Wisconsin Fund's been extended. Exactly how everything's going to work out, and to make sure everything internally is set, so that we can get the funding to everybody, that hasn't been worked out yet. So I just want to point that out. Until we hear more, we're still waiting. We'll get that information to you as soon as we can. I want to mention high strength wastewater. This is one that just keeps on popping up. What do we do with high strength wastewater? What is it? Well, high strength wastewater is anything that is greater than residential. So the code, SPS 383, defines residential strength wastewater as under 220 BOD, under 150 TSS, and under 30 FOG. So if anything is above that, then it's considered high strength waste. So things such as bakeries, a restaurant or a kitchen, bars and taverns, convenience stores, these are all listed as high strength waste. Now, if you look at the appendix in our table 383, it'll list in there, there'll be a little subletters in there that will tell you what is expected to be high strength waste, what is expected, what we consider to be an at-risk, or what is considered domestic waste. So it's important that we run into these kind of things that we're addressing them properly. So one of the biggest issues that we have is that all high strength wastes are not treated equal, or not equal. Restaurant A may generate just over these limits. Another restaurant may be multiples higher, 2, 3, 4, 5 times higher. So we really don't know what's out there. So one of the best mechanisms that we have is to do testing. SPS 383.44 parent 2 parent B says that in order to do, to run a test or to sample, that we need to take measurements within 30 consecutive days, with at least 6 measurements occurring on 6 separate days. So we need 6 samples for BOD, TSS, FOG, and you take the average of those. So that's how we determine what we have. And it's really important, because if we are looking to do something such as reduce the high strength waste down to a residential strength so that we can apply the administrative code, the question is when you go to a manufacturer, they're going to want to know, well, what do you have? Are we just slightly over? Are we a lot over? I mean, their products are going to be dependent upon what's being generated to start with. So, and really, if you're running into these commercial kind of establishments, one of the most critical things is to know exactly what we're dealing with. Too many times we've had situations where somebody says, well, I'll just put a pretreatment in there, but we don't really know if that treatment is going to work or not, because we're not sure that it's able to treat the waste because that's an unknown. So instead of just looking at it and saying let's just put something on it and hope for the best, we should actually be testing to determine what we have and then applying the correct pretreatment or correct um, recommendation, how we're going to size that system. One of the other things we could do is segregate the waste streams. So that's been something that we've seen for like a restaurant. We'll take like the restroom waste and we'll put that into what we consider as domestic wastewater, and we'll treat that normally. And then the kitchen waste will segregate out. Either they'll do a separate system and treat that, or because it's high strength waste, they may just put that into a holding tank and then pump that to a wastewater treatment plant and handle that separately. So I guess the thing with the high strength wastewater, I've run into this several times this summer, is that we don't really know what we're dealing with. So we really need some samples. And then once we go that route, then we can decide what to do and how we're going to handle it. So also when we're looking at pretreatment, a lot of the pretreatment is just taking it from residential or high strength back down to residential. To take it from a high strength all the way down to pretreated is really tough for a lot of these units to do. And again, in addition to that, we really have to know what we're dealing with in order to know how far we can treat that down. So, and all pretreatment devices aren't the same. Manufacturers have different capabilities. That's something that we need from the manufacturer. We'll need to know from them that they can treat whatever waste down to the parameters that you're trying for, either residential strength waste or highly pretreated waste. So I guess the word is that um, on these systems, commercial systems, high strength waste, we should probably be doing sampling and looking into that. We may also, from the department's end, require sampling on the other end to verify as part of the performance base that you actually met your goals that you're saying that you are. So anyway, if you get involved with these, contact your field person or a plan reviewer, and we'll help walk you through the process on these. As part of the larger systems that we have, some of the commercials, and not only high strength waste, but one of the other issues that we deal with is determining the amount of flow. And we've had some sites here where we don't really have good numbers. A well, knowing that we pumped X number of gallons per month, that doesn't really tell us exactly what the usage is for that system. So when we design, or estimate a wastewater flow for commercial facilities, we need to look at SPS 383.43 parent 6A, and that says we need to use measured daily wastewater flow over a period of time. So, averages. So if we know we pumped whatever X number of gallons in a month, that tells us what our average was, but it doesn't tell us peaks. So especially if we have something, for instance, let's say a church or something like that, obviously they're going to have a high load on Sunday when church services take place, and the rest of the week there's probably not much going on. So if we design by the average, we're going to miss those peaks. So it's also required that once we do a measured daily flow, that we design for the peak flow reading. So whatever that peak is, that would be our design, or 1.5 times the average flow, whichever one is higher. So for instance, if we have a church that's doing 1,000 gallons on Sunday, but only 100 gallons the rest of the week, we would either design for that peak flow of the 1,000, or if the average would times 1.5 is higher, we would design for that. So it's important for us that if we are, trying to meter the flow and determine the usage on some of these larger facilities, that it has to be daily wastewater flow over a period of time. So we can't use aggregates of monthly flows or weekly flows, or they check the water meter every so often. We have to have a daily flow. And again, like anything, just with the sampling before, it has to be representative of the use of the facility. So we don't want to be sampling, wastewater on days where they're not active. We also don't want to be, measuring daily flow on a time where, for instance, it's a resort that's mostly busy in the summer. We don't want to be measuring wastewater flows in the winter when it's not active. So something that again ties in with these larger commercial systems. Metered flows, remember that has to be daily. Recore mounts. This is one that another thing that's been popping up a lot lately is, what do we do, or what is a recore mount? What exactly is it? So if you're recoring a mound, basically that's somebody that's taking out the center part of a mound. We've had a biomat failure up into the mound, and we're going to basically take out, the piping and a gravel, and then the biomat, and then replace it. First of all, a recore mound is um, it's just like a putting in a new system. They would require plan review either at the county level if they're agents or back at the state. Requires a state sanitary permit. They're not repairs. Recore mound is the same as putting a whole new system in. But some other things to take into account is where is the failure? If it's failure up in the biomat, then we can do a recore. If we have a failure that it's blowing out the side or at the bottom, which is the sand soil interface, then that's not a candidate for a recore because the failure is something else other than just the biomat. So we have to make sure that one, we're evaluating the right sites to do a recore. Also, we've run into an issue where is the sand ASTM C33? That's been a requirement in the code now for a number of years, since 2000, and also in the component manuals. But some of the older systems that were put in, if we're recoring an old mound from the 80s, some of those were not required to be ASTM C33, and they were not. So according to the current code, is that it has to be ASTM C33 sand. So we need to take a look at that to determine, we need to see the old plans, and especially if you're doing a recore, they should send in the old plan along so that we can see what's out there now. So we have to look at that to make sure that the sand is of the right material. Also the same footprint. The problem that we have with a lot of these older systems, these older mounds, is that they were designed at a 1.2 loading rate instead of the 1.0. So it's not a one-for-one replacement, and we're not just replacing the sort of the insides of the mound, we're modifying it substantially. And that can cause some problems where if we don't have the same footprint, do we have a part of the mound that's not being used? What do we do with it? Do we have to expand it further? And those cause some issues in the way we're designing some things. And if it's not the same footprint, then we may be running into where it's not just a simple recore, one-for-one replacement. We may be running into some individual site designs if we have to modify some things. The other thing is, do we need a full soil test? If we're looking at a recore mounds, and I'll talk about that a little bit later here about soil tests, but depending on what documentation we have ahead of time, is if we don't have a modern morphological soil test on hand, we would need a soil test in order to show us that site area is good. And even like a lot of sites, even though the soil test passed back in 1986, that doesn't necessarily mean the site meets criteria today. Things could have changed. There could have been some modifications of the site. So we have to evaluate it basically like we're starting over on that site and see what we can use, what we can't use, either for the soil test or the system that's out there. Also want to mention that we need to dispose of contaminated material properly. When we're pulling out, contaminated gravel or biomat or the sand, that that material out there is considered sewage. It's a contaminated material, so we have to dispose of that properly. A lot of times it's taken to a landfill, or it can be disposed of in a manner according to the NR 113, the same as sewage would be. But it's a human health hazard. We have to maintain some kind of sanitation with it and handle it properly. We can't just dump it out on the ground or do whatever we want with it. So also, plans and permit are required. Again, it's not a repair, so you're going to have to get plan review and get a state sanitary permit in order to do a recore for a mount. Want to talk about floats and dose settings. We've had some issues with this cropping up. So the important thing is when you're looking at your floats or setting your floats, the important question to ask is, can your floats do what you need them to do? We've been seeing, depending on the products that are out there, we've been seeing some very low dose volumes that are required, especially for some of the passive pretreatments like the geomats and elgens. They have very low dose volumes set by the products. Um, well, the question is that can you do a low dose volume? We've had some. We had one here just a while ago that was little over a half an inch was the dose volume. Well, with their typical floats, they don't have that. Um, they can't do that. They don't have that level of sensitivity in order to do those low volumes, or the floats are going to be messing with each other because they're right next to each other and there's no room for them. So even though you spec this, you have to make sure that you have floats that can do it. Now, we've had some folks that have, designed it, and then a plumber will come out there and say, "Well, how am I supposed to do that?" Well, you may not be able to get by with a simple, standard float, seen here in the float tree. You may have to go with something, another product that's much more expensive that has like the little diaphragm in it. Um, that's a sensor. So those are the things to pay attention to is, make some float dose settings that make sense. There's other ways you can do it, put a block in the tank to change the volumes there. But make sure that you have reasonable numbers here. So when you're doing the installation out in the field or whoever beyond you is doing the installation out in the field, that it's something that's attainable. Also, we've seen some really odd elevations, to the hundredths of a foot. I know a lot of people like to use the crew files and it automatically calculates out things for you. But it doesn't make sense. Nobody's out there going to be able to measure, 4.61 inches. It's better to round off to like 4.5 or 5 inch. So it's easier for everybody to measure and put those floats out there at elevations that make sense. Also been looking at things that, products that, I mentioned that sort of products that require a max dose, um, or low dose volumes, make sure that you're meeting the float or the dose settings that are required. So if you have a unit that only says you can only, do so many gallons per lineal foot, we have to make sure that those float settings or that those settings are meeting that. Also, it helps in your design too, is to take a look at some of these things. I've seen some that have come through that have had very, very narrow ranges. That's, the 5 times void volume is 88 gallon and the max is 90, and trying to get your float setting exactly between 88 and 90 gallons is pretty difficult to do. So just take care in your designs, make sure that your float settings are accurate, make sense, and then also that it can do what you need it to do. We've had some new product inquiries. All the time we get different people that have different products or new tanks, things like that. But it's important to remember that all products used in the state of Wisconsin need to have product approval. So that's a requirement for us. So if it's not a product that's being approved, we do have some things such as, like incinerating toilets or composting toilets, even though they're not a approved product by the state, the code sections address them, such as incinerating toilets must meet ANSI or NSF certifications, and composting toilets must meet NSF 41. So there are some other things out there besides state approval. However, one of the things that we ran into here was this unit here, which is a whole home wastewater incinerator. So this takes, it's not just a composting toilet where, the gray water is treated separately and just the black water from that toilet, it's a self-contained incinerating or composting toilet. This unit here actually takes all the wastewater from the home. Well, the code states that all buildings with a water supply need to have a POWTS. So this would actually not be a county permit, most likely, is if this does get approved, and we haven't approved this yet, but if a product like this would get approved because it's taking wastewater from the whole home, this would basically be considered a substitute for POWTS. So again, you have to make sure that products are approved. So if you're a county or an installer running into these things, you can't just install them. There may be permitting issues. There may be product approval issues. So check into these things, with us at the state or the county, before you start going down the road of possibly purchasing or trying to install one of these things. So there are some regulatory issues to deal with on these. But this product is a new one. We've had a few inquiries this year about it. It looks like they're trying to seek approval with us, and we'll go down that road and see what pans out. I mentioned before about with recourse, whether we might have to have a soil test again or not. The old EH115, the old perk tests. I've had this same image up before. They're like a zombie. They keep coming back. The important thing to remember is percolation rates removed from the code in 2018. So perk tests are no longer a valid method. We say that soil tests never expire. Well, a soil test doesn't, but perk tests did. Perk tests are gone. They're not in the code. They're not relevant anymore. So you treat them as though they don't exist. I know some people have said, well, they've got some information on there about redox or not. Well, you have to remember that at the time when the EH115 is being used, that information may or may not be valid. Is that some of them did report information like that, such as redox, others did not. So just because it's on there or not on there doesn't mean that it's necessarily valid at the site. So we have to treat EH115 as though it's not even there. So the important things to remember is that if you're just replacing a tank, so we have a failed tank on, let's say, a drain field, we still need at least one boring to confirm that we meet our separation distance yet out in that drain field or out in that cell. Otherwise, if you're doing something else, such as doing a recore of an old mound, we would need a new soil test because EH115 does not exist. So if you're doing something out there and it's only an EH115, it's considered we have no paperwork. So we would need to have a soil test. So that's the biggest thing to remember is just treat them as though they don't exist. Want to mention variances. We've seen a few of these come through this summer. To do a variance, you can go on the POWTS website on DSPS. There's a form, SBD 9890X. So you should complete that form. That form does walk you through the process. What's the code section being petitioned? What's your equivalency? One of the other important things on there, it must have the owner's signature. The owner has to sign it. It's a variance the owner is asking for the variance. It's not coming from the designer or for the plumber. So the owner is applying for the variance. Also, a variance has to show equivalence to the code. So the only way we're going to grant a variance is if the code says you need to have, X number of feet separation distance, and the reason being for, whatever, a tank from a building, the reason is that we don't want to have a structural instability of the building. We don't want to have structural instability of the tank. So if you're going to go less than that, they're going to have to show equivalence to how they're going to protect each of those components, the building and the tank. So it's an equivalence kind of thing. Just because I don't have room, they're going to have, that's not we can't approve that. They're going to have a reason at, what the request is and how they're going to, show equivalence to that. Each code section is a separate variance. So if you're doing multiple things, it would require multiple variances. Each time there's a different code section, it would be a different variance. One of the things that is different compared to, I know the counties sometimes struggle with this, is that our variances, you can create your own hardship, where other things such as zoning, you can't do that. Ours is just a strict equivalence. If you can show an equivalence, we will give a variance, to that applicant, to that homeowner. So just because they want to put up a giant garage and a giant house on a small lake lot and they want to reduce the separation distances, They can, as long as they can show equivalence to the code. That's the only way we're going to evaluate it is equivalence. Also want to mention as with plans, we do not accept in a paper format anymore. So it does have to be done through ESLA. Um, we don't recommend, the owner can set up their own account and can send it in on their own. But if you have the form completed and have this, owner signature on it, you as, the plumber or designer can submit on their behalf. We're open to that. We realize that the owners don't know how to navigate ESLA and will have a tough time with that. And we've seen a lot of things messed up. So we don't have a problem with you submitting on their behalf, but the form needs to be completed, and that's the attachment, and it should have the owner's signature as part of that, or it's required to have the owner's signature. So just make sure if you go through the variance process, if you have any questions, contact us. We'll gladly walk you through that. But again, we have to show equivalence to the code. And if you are doing something like that, pictures, the old adage, pictures worth 1,000 words, that really helps us evaluate, if we do have photos of the site and what's going on. But again, variance has to show equivalence. It's not a way to get around the code or just an exception to the code. Have to show an equivalence.
Hey, Matt, before you move on
Yeah.
from variances, can I just have you put a point of clarification to the
Sure.
note there about each code section as a separate variance? So when
Yep.
we look at table 383-43-1 horizontal setback parameters, if
Yep.
they're petitioning a variance to both the property line and say to a building, because it's a very tight lot, would that be two separate variances or
That's one variance. One variance because it's a codes per code section.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify
Yep.
that with the
Yep.
group. Sure that
Yep.
we
So
didn't
if you
all of a
have,
sudden get a whole bunch of additional variance applications.
yeah, so if you have two separation distances at the same time, because you're only petitioning the one code section, that one table, that would just be one variance submittal.
Thank you.
Wanted to mention, we've had some questions that have popped up about, POWTS versus general plumbing. Just want to remind everybody that, POWTS is considered the tank and beyond. So it's either the holding tank or it's a septic tank and whatever lays beyond that. Septic tank and then a pretreatment tank and then whatever distribution box, drain field, mound, whatever we have. That's what's considered the POWTS. General plumbing is everything in front of that. So general plumbing would be private interceptor mains, building sewers. I guess I didn't put it on here. Even things like a grease trap, any kind of collection network. So campgrounds, mobile home parks, etc. They may have an extensive, basically private interceptor mains. They've got a collection network ahead there. And it may include things such as lift stations and ejector pits or grinder pits. So all that stuff in front of the tank is general plumbing, technically. So, I mean, if there's issues, I've had one here as a large campground, and they had a very extensive, building sewer, private interceptor mains, lift stations, collecting from like, 50 different, sewered campsites, and that's all general plumbing. That's up to them to approve and inspect either through their local UDC inspector, or if the plumbing folks go out to take a look at it. That's general plumbing. It's not part of the POWTS. So just be aware that there's a lot of other things out there, but our inspectors at the county levels do look at things like that, and they do have the authority to inspect those things while they're out there looking at the POWTS. And that's because the inspectors or most of the counties have adopted 381, 382, and 384, which is the general plumbing, the definitions in the general plumbing. We use it also, connections and products. In 384, we use 382, general plumbing principles, connections and, pitch on pipes, things like that. So, the inspectors, while they're out there looking at, obviously the new mound or the new conventional system going in, if the building sewer doesn't have proper bedding or proper insulation, I mean, they can still make note of that. They can still write orders on that because we incorporate that. But there's other things that, it sort of, it gets into a gray area, things like private interceptor mains. If you're connecting a, private garage, workshop kind of thing with the home, and they have a private interceptor main being installed along with the POWTS, you know, yes, the county inspectors can look at that, but really the requirements for that are general plumbing, and especially collection networks or lift stations or ejector pits and things ahead of time. Those are general plumbing. Grease traps, we can review them at the same time as a pouts if it's sent in together, but grease traps, the requirements for them, whether they're required, sizing, other stuff, that's really a general plumbing issue. So just be aware, that there are some other things out there that may require general plumbing to weigh in on, or may require um, their approval of things. I wanted to mention tested area. This question's cropped up here recently, and it keeps cropping up. Is that we don't have a hard and fast definition exactly what a tested area is. Years ago, we had some plan reviewers that actually draw lines between the borings or the pits, and the whole system had to be within that triangle. The pits or the borings need to define an area. They shouldn't be in a straight line. That's not an area, that's a line. But they define an area, a triangle. And we understand that, if you drew a triangle here, that, the system would not fit totally within that triangular bounds, but the majority of the system fits in the tested area. And the tested area well corresponds here with, the mound system. But I've also seen some designs where, 3/4 or 90% even of the system isn't within the tested area. So we have to make sure that, that a couple things as soil testers, we test a big enough area and define that area. If you feel confident that there's more area than just between the pits, by all means, you can put a dotted or dashed line down there and say, these are my 3 pits, and this is my tested area. This is what I feel confident in, and allow that designer to install that. But the soil testers need to define a big enough area. If they push their pits real close together, they may not be able, as a designer or as a plumber, put a system in that area that's defined. So it takes both halves here, soil testers and the designers, to make sure that we're testing a big enough area, and also that we're designing that system in the tested area. Wanted to mention time of sale inspections. We've had this crop up a few times. Um, you know, somebody does a time of sale inspection, what's required, or does that meet the criteria for the 3-year maintenance requirement to be pumped or serviced, or to determine whether it needs to be pumped? Um, well, there is no requirement for or code addressing time of sale inspections. Um, so since there's no requirement, and actually there's another code section in there, another statute section that basically says, we cannot impose any kind of rules that would hold up a sale of a property. So there are no such things as time of sale inspections, from our end as a regulatory end. So since they're unregulated, basically anybody, any credential, or actually you don't even need a credential, anybody can do a time of sale inspection. However, the time of sale inspections are done to satisfy the buyer and or the lending institution to know that they're not buying a piece of property that's got some severe deficiencies on it. So it's done to satisfy the lending institution and the buyer's peace of mind. That's not done to meet a DSPS code, or it's not necessarily done according to the criteria that we outline in our code, whether a system is legal or not, or is code compliant or functioning properly. So we've seen some time of sale inspections that sail through. They really don't say anything, and then somebody down the line, short order, a year later, comes by and says, like a county that says, "Hey, your system's illegal or it's failing. You need to replace it." And then sometimes people are mad because they said, "We just did an inspection here when we bought the property, and nobody mentioned that." So just be aware, time of sale inspections. There's no code requirements for them. There's no criteria for them. Um, basically it's done just to satisfy the buyer, the lending institution, or whatever they require. They're not equivalent to an inspection done by a county. They're not equivalent to an inspection or a maintenance requirement. There's something that's totally unregulated, and there's no requirements for them. ISTM C33, that's the standard for mound sand. The standard for mound sand is that it has to meet the ASTM C33 for fine aggregate. So we hear that term, we say that term, what's ASTM C33? We also have the stone aggregate has to also meet ASTM C33, but that's for coarse aggregate. And it has to be washed. So it can't be a pit run material, it actually has to go through a washing process. So DSPS does not certify pits or quarries. It's up to them, whoever the supplier is, it's up to them to show test data that they meet the standard. So we've been approached, and somebody will have like what they call like the curve, which has all the different particle sizes, and it'll say, does this meet or not? It's not up to the department to certify or say whether it meets or not. When the manufacturer or the pit or the quarry or whoever is providing these earth materials, it's up to them to hire the testing facility, provide their sample, and up to the testing facility to state, yes, it meets the ASTM C33 standard, or no, it does not, and then show the data to prove that. So um, so we're running into this. We're seeing some issues where the lab's not stating whether it meets or not. They need to do that. But then again, even if they do have the certificate, things will change. They may not be washing accurately. They may pick up some other contaminated sources, such as a pile of gravel, if they scoop too deep and get some dirt or earth with it. So just because they have a certificate doesn't mean that you still can't challenge or question the materials that are coming through that they may or may not meet. If something looks off, I mean, let us know. We can evaluate it also. But as far as does it meet or does it not, that's up to the supplier to determine. They have to get it tested. And they have to have that information to show that they did meet. Complaints, we've been getting an increased number of complaints this year, specifically for whatever reason, a lot of license violations. People installing systems without permits or things like that. I don't know if it's just because everybody's been so busy, they've not been obtaining permits or things like that. But any complaint or license violation, should be tracked through the department, regardless if the county's pursuing any kind of enforcement. So, the county may issue orders, or they may have issued a citation, but especially this mostly for the county folks. But if you're seeing a violation or an issue, go onto our website, fill out a complaint form and send that in. Because what we've seen here is, one, our department, the legal team is following up on these. We've also seen issues where you may have known about an enforcement issue and said, hey, I've caught this guy 5 times red-handed doing without a permit, and now I want something done about his license. The problem is now you turn that complaint into us, it's the first one. Just because you've handled the other ones, our department, our legal staff is unaware of the other ones. So make sure that you turn them in. So if we do have somebody that's habitually causing issues out there or violating, that we do have a track record of it. So just want to put that out there. If you have a complaint or an issue on a license, to make sure that you're using your complaint form. Large scale systems, just a quick one here. DSPS and the DNR MOU is not finalized yet. Our code requires us to inform the DNR anytime there's a system over the 12,000 gallon per day threshold, design threshold. So that's all it does. It just says we have to notify the DNR. The DNR will then decide, well, if in fact it does, if we think it does, the DNR will say, yes, that does, or no, it's not. And either way, they'll decide what actions they want to take upon that information being provided to them. So they can require additional parameters such as monitoring wells, sampling, or nitrogen removal. That's up to the DNR and what their codes are and what they choose to do, whether they issue their own WPDS permit, whether it's a general or specific or require anything. That's up to the DNR. It's our obligation to inform the DNR of those systems over 12,000 gallons. So if everything's not clearly defined yet, the MOU is not signed, it's still working its way through the chain of command. But if you think you have a large scale system, please let your district person know as soon as possible so we can start walking you through the process. It's still sort of a cumbersome and odd process right now. Other thing with the DNR is commingled wastewater. We still see some issues with this. Is that if you have something that's commingled, so a domestic industrial wastewater, the DNR has to give concurrence for that. So it doesn't matter if it's going into just a holding tank or if it's something that they think that can be put into, let's say, a drain field, a mound, or a conventional system. The DNR has to give concurrence on anything that is non-domestic. So if we're combining things, you have to get the DNR's okay on that. DNR also has sole authority, or DSPS has authority, sole authority on less than 12,000 gallons per day domestics. We said before, MOU of anything larger than that, we sort of have shared custody of the system, so to speak. But then also the DNR has sole authority on industrial wastewater, and no sanitary permit is issued. So if it is a facility that is only industrial wastewater, such as um, something like a car wash or um, yeah, we've had some ethanol plants that have waste discharge, or if we have, let's say, a slaughterhouse or something like that. If it's an industrial wastewater, even though they may be putting a tank in the ground and it may look like a POWTS or a holding tank, that's a DNR authority. If it's industrial, DNR has sole authority for that. There's no sanitary permit issued, no state sanitary permit issued. It's not a POWTS because it's an industrial wastewater. So just make sure that we're getting those right, that commingled wastewater, you have to get the DNR. We have domestic, DNR has industrial. Also wanted to mention next week coming up is Septic Smart Week. It's something that is done through the EPA, annual event. So they've got different things, communities, local governments, state governments. There's some things, proclamations and things that can be done out there. A lot of good information to give to homeowners, basically promoting, the good care and good use of septic systems. So if you're interested in that, go check out the EPA website, Septic Smart, and you can learn some more about some of the activities that they're doing. Just wanted to point that out to you, that it's out there. The EPA is also a great resource besides us here at the state, for things, all things septic. Um, Sort of an homage to to Jerry here. Jerry did a lot of things with plan reviews. Even though he's retired, some of his favorite things um, to talk about are plan issues that we see, and we're still getting these in. And especially this summer, we've been so busy. Make sure that you're looking over your plans before you submit them. Simple things as no north arrow. We can't read it; it's just cluttered, or they're using an air photo and trying to draw plot plans on it, and we can't see things. Um, you can look through the list here. Commercial use descriptions, missing information, not even including the soil test or your signatures, things like that. Um, Also, I've been personally, I've been seeing a lot of issues with incorrect fill depths. You've got 18 inches of fill, but the soil test says you only have 12 inches of suitable soil. You're short. And a lot of it, I think, is cut and paste errors. Is that I know some of you are using a previous plan, and sort of cutting and pasting. It's the same as the other one, but then forgetting to change some of the numbers in either the crew file or on your plan. If you're writing them in yourself, you're forgetting to change or modify some things. So just I know everybody gets busy, things get rushed, but take care, read through your plans, make sure that all the data is there, all the paperwork is there, soil test is included, signatures are there, and that you're not making simple mistakes. So anyway, that's the end of the presentation there. Um, Again, you can go on our DSPS website or contact myself or anybody else, the district folks here, or Josh, the plan reviewer, if you have any questions. Otherwise, that's what I have for you this month.
Hi, Matt. There was a question in the chat from Alex. He was wondering if you could briefly discuss the Wisconsin Fund again. He had some audio issues. He was wondering if you could
Okay.
just repeat what you had to say or maybe even expound upon it a little bit.
Yeah. So for the Wisconsin Fund, basically there's been an extension of, it had a sunset date of June 30th of 23 in there, and it's been extended to June 30th of 2025. So Nothing has changed from the previous years. It's still $840,000 per year. But with our timing here, we're probably going to have a double batch like we did previously because the money that would be given out right now in September would have been for last year's installations, and obviously nobody applied. So we'll probably have a double dip here. Income limitations and age of the systems have not changed. That did not go through in the budget process. However, just like the previous cycle we went through, as although the sunset date has moved back and the criteria is still the same, we had with the last budget, we had an issue was even when they moved it back, they didn't necessarily provide the funding or how that was going to be done. And I believe that's what the issue is now. It's unclear, but our legal staff is our fiscal team is looking at that and it's being evaluated right now. So everything's sort of in a holding pattern because even though they extended the date, we don't think that we have the funding authority to go with it. There's still some things that need to be sorted out. Let's just leave it at that. So until we get final go-aheads on that, we don't have any information to share with you yet. We're still sort of in a limbo, waiting to see how this all shakes out. But as soon as we know, we'll let you guys know. I know a lot of counties have been accepting, sort of preliminary applications here, anticipating that we'll get this straightened out soon. But again, applications don't have to be into us until January 30th. So we're sort of in a holding pattern right now, waiting to see exactly what shakes out here. But Wisconsin Fund's been extended, but exactly how we're going to do that, that hasn't been finalized or settled yet, and we'll let you know.
Thank you, Matt. If anyone else has any additional questions they'd like to enter them in the chat or unmute yourself and just announce it to the group, we have some time here. Otherwise, if you'd like to enter your credentials and name into the chat to sign out, that would be great. Travis did add a note into the chat, Travis from DSPS, that we're currently out about 14 days in plan review. So we'll be working hard on plan review coming up here. That may limit, well, it has been limiting our ability to go out and do on-sites. But hopefully as our 3 new staff members are onboarded, we'll have the ability to go out in the field more often.
Right. And that's the thing too, is I sort of forgot to mention that is, with our diminished capacity right now, we only have 5 staff and we're going to be up to 12 sometime this winter. But as of right now, we're out quite a bit on plan review. We've had, staff that have been gone on vacations and other things, and there's only a few of us to go around. So we're working hard on getting those plans out and juggling, anytime we do have to do an on-site in response to plans, but we're really not able at this time to go out and do standard on-sites like we usually do just because the plan load is so high. So we're working to address that, and hopefully with 3 new hires, we'll be in much better position next year to handle the workload. But good point, Travis. So anyway, yeah, make sure you put your credentials in at the end